something deep and silent is unraveling within Iran at this very moment. And it's not a foreign offensive, nor bombs dropped from the sky, nor military incursions from outside, but rather a collapse born from within, fueled by the very pillars that sustained power for decades. What was once a rigid and seemingly unshakable structure now reveals cracks that are expanding with alarming speed. While figures of authority clash directly, generals confront diplomats, religious leaders can no longer maintain the same influence, and the control that once seemed absolute begins to slip through their fingers. In the streets, tension ignites into revolt, into a growing clamor that can no longer be ignored. For 47 years, the regime built its image on the idea of unbreakable resistance, that it would never yield, never bend to any external pressure. But now the narrative begins to crumble, not because an enemy has managed to invade its borders, but because the internal machinery itself has collided. The question that echoes is no longer whether Iran can win an external confrontation, but whether it will manage to get through the next few days without collapsing completely, because time has become its cruelest adversary. Every passing hour brings the system closer to an irreversible breaking point. To understand the gravity of the moment, it's necessary to see the strategy that has been devised against it. A strategy that doesn't depend solely on traditional military force, but on something more elaborate, more calculated, a precisely constructed trap where every move by Iran only deepens its own crisis. What has been created in the Strait of Hormuz doesn't resemble conventional warfare. There are no large explosions or visible invasions, but there is a complex mechanism that operates on different levels simultaneously, preventing exits, blocking entrances, and, most importantly, eroding trust within the regime itself. The intention is not to destroy Iran directly, but to bring it to a point where it disintegrates under the weight of its internal contradictions. This strategy operates in layers. The first layer is military, restricting movements and creating a silent siege. The second is economic, stifling revenues, interrupting vital import and export flows. And the third, the most powerful, acts on the mind, on perception, on trust, breaking internal alliances, creating suspicion, pitting leaders against each other, making any effective coordination impossible. And the most impressive thing is that all this happens while the rest of the world continues almost unchanged. Ships sail on. Crossing the strait, oil from other nations flows normally. Global markets don't collapse. And this further isolates Iran because it shows that the blockade is not general but directed only at it. The country finds itself trapped in a situation where any response it tries to implement only worsens its condition. It cannot close the strait because it no longer has total control over it. It cannot threaten global supply because that guard has already been neutralized. And it cannot sustain its economy without oil revenues, which have now practically disappeared. Reports indicate that storage tanks are about to reach their maximum capacity. And when that happens, production will have to be interrupted, triggering a series of technical and geological consequences that are difficult to reverse. Wells that are closed lose pressure, underground structures suffer damage, and in many cases production never returns to its previous level. The impact, therefore, is not only immediate but projects into the future, compromising the country's capacity for months or even years, further aggravating the situation. There is also a structural contradiction that becomes evident in this scenario. The country possesses vast oil reserves but cannot refine enough to meet its own domestic demand, depending on exporting raw materials and importing refined fuels. With the blockade, both avenues are interrupted. Power lines create a paradoxical situation where a nation rich in energy resources faces internal shortages. Lines form at gas stations, stretching for great distances, and the population feels the weight of a crisis that directly impacts daily life. It is precisely here that the regime suffers its most sensitive blow, for years it maintained an implicit agreement with its people, a silent exchange between political control and economic stability, less freedom in exchange for material security. However, this pact has been broken, and dissatisfaction comes not only from historical opponents but also grows among those who previously supported the system, believing in its ability to guarantee the basics. While external pressure increases, internal divisions become more visible. Two large power blocks clearly emerge. On one side are the more rigid sectors linked to the ideological military structure, who see any retreat as a threat. For them, yielding is a threat to the very essence of the regime. To them means ceasing to exist, and therefore they advocate more aggressive responses, even if this increases the risk of direct confrontation. On the other side are more pragmatic figures who see the economic reality and defend negotiations as the only way to avoid total collapse. These groups not only disagree, they clash directly, creating a scenario where strategic decisions become impossible and paralysis sets in as time continues to advance. This tension had been growing silently, but the current blockade acted as a catalyst, transforming internal divergences into open confrontation. Then a specific event further accelerated this process. A public declaration made abruptly, without apparent coordination, signaling an attempt to normalize the situation in the strait, but without real guarantees, without concrete agreements, and without visible support. This attitude was interpreted by many within the system itself as a unilateral concession, a gesture that relinquished one of the few remaining strategic cards without obtaining anything in return. The reaction was immediate. Accusations arose, internal questioning intensified, and trust between different sectors of power suffered a profound blow. External statements reinforced the perception that Iran had, even though the land had been ceded, even if it wasn't formally established, the damage was already done. In politics, perception often outweighs facts. And within the country, the narrative that gained traction was that there had been a disguised surrender. The silence of important figures after these events only fueled suspicions and the climate of instability. Members of parliament began to express discontent more openly, something that previously only occurred behind the scenes. Meanwhile, a new front intensified in the streets, but this time there was something different. It wasn't just traditional opposition movements or isolated protests motivated by specific events, but a more diffuse, more comprehensive dissatisfaction that affected different layers of society. People who had previously remained silent began to question the direction of the country, and the future became more uncertain than ever. The combination of economic pressure, strategic isolation, internal divisions, and loss of confidence creates an extremely delicate scenario where any mistake can trigger irreversible consequences. As the days go by, the sense of urgency intensifies inside and outside the country. Everyone watches, trying to predict what the next move will be, but the truth is that Iran itself seems to have lost the ability to completely control the situation. The course of events changes, and when a system reaches this point, it no longer depends solely on rational decisions, but becomes influenced by emotions, fear, distrust, and contradictory impulses, making the outcome even more unpredictable and possibly more dramatic than any previously planned scenario.